Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this evening's council meeting. I'll call this meeting to order. In order to call attendance, I'll now conduct a roll call by calling each councilor's name. Councilors, when I call your name, please say, Councilor Bagu. Councilor Bagu, you're on mute.
Sorry, present, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
Councilor Beauregard?
Here.
Councilor Bodnar?
Here.
Councilor Danch?
Here.
Councilor Desmarais is away. She'll be joining us a little later, hopefully. Councilor Califf?
Here.
Councilor Wells?
Here.
Thank you. Mayor Steele is away this evening, and so we'll now begin with our national anthem.
Oh, Canada, our home and native land, to be true love in all of us coming. Cattle bus and porte le pain, il say porte la foi, non histoire to Naples Bay, des plus brillants exploits. God keep my land glorious and free. Protège à nos foyers, c'est nos droits. Oh, Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
That's great. Moving on to proclamations. There are no proclamations this evening. Adoption of the agenda. Items 7.5 and 9.13 have been withdrawn from the agenda at the request of staff. Moved by Councilor Califf, seconded by Councilor Bagu. All in favor? Opposed? That is carried. The agenda dated July 26, 2021 be confirmed as amended. If any councilor has a question about the agenda, please raise your hand now. Having none, all those in favor, please raise your hand. Opposed? Any? None. Motion is carried. Thank you. Disclosures of interest. Councilor Wells has declared a conflict of interest on items 7.1 and 19.1. Are there any other councilors who wish to disclose a conflict of interest this evening? There being none, thank you. I will move along to the next councilor. Approval of the minutes. 6.1, the regular meeting of council held on July 12th, 2021. I have a mover, Councilor Wells, seconder, Councilor Bodnar. Any questions to the agenda? There being none, all those in favor? Opposed? That is, the motion is carried. Next is staff reports and correspondence items. This evening, we have pulled for separate discussions, items 7.1, 7.2, 7.4, 7.6, and 7.7. Are there any other items that a councilor wishes to discuss? Okay, let's proceed with the motion to have the remainder of the items that haven't been pulled for separate discussion approved. I have a mover, Councilor Danch, seconder, Councilor Beauregard. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Item 9, presentations. There are no presentations this evening. 10, delegations. There are no delegations this evening. With the mayor being away, there will not be a mayor's report this evening. And Regional Councilor Butters is not here, I presume away. So there will be no regional council report. Moving quickly along here to staff remarks. Any staff members have remarks they wish to provide to council? Oh, Madam Clerk.
Good evening. I just want to make a quick note that we are conducting recruitment for citizen committees. We are optimistic and hoping to get started with them in the fall at some point, the ones that aren't already meeting. And applications are available on our city website or contact customer service. Ads will be in the paper and on social media as well, and applications are due Friday, August 13th. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Any questions to the clerk on that? Clarifications? There being none, we'll move on to councilors' remarks. Oh, sorry. Oh, I beg your pardon, Chris. I didn't see you. Mr. Kolomoto.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to give council sort of a brief update of the events that happened on July 17th, the rainfall event, if I may so be indulged.
Yes.
Seeing no objection, I would just like to point out that on July 16th, staff checked multiple weather platforms for the next day, and the rainfall that they were expecting was 20 to 40 millimeters of rain. Because of that, staff prepped a 6-inch pump for Neff Street, just in case, as most systems are able to take 20 to 40 millimeters. The region was also contacted and said same that about the Bartok area, that they should be good with the projected rainfall. The first call came in at 8:18 a.m. on the Saturday that staff received, and they went straight to second concession, Neff. They put some pumps in along with Clark Street and the pumping station at Schofield. There was another call around just before 11 o'clock near Bartok, and staff again put some additional pumps in, and we're pumping with a 2-inch pump, 2 3-inch pumps, and a 6-inch pump in all those respective areas all the way up until midnight. Staff kept notes, pictures as much as they could, and I also did want to point out that we had Mike Audette come in a few days early off his surgery to help out. So I just wanted to give him very much thanks. With the rainfall event, there were also trees down and road closures that staff had to abide to. Overall, we had 30 incident reports, 73 messages, and just as a comparison, Welland had 88. So we actually did quite well considering the amount of rainfall that we got. Unfortunately, the NPCA released their warning only early that afternoon because it was such a surprise flood. We have records that go up to 120 millimeters in 7 hours. And just for comparison, the normal month of July for the entire month is approximately 70 millimeters. So that just goes to show that no system in Ontario could have handled that amount of rain. I do want to thank the 9 staff who did go out and did a terrific job. With respect to what we did after, we did do a post-mortem held by Manager Studdard, and that was with internal staff and also with the region of what we did, what worked well, and what we could do better. And again, we will be moving forward with certain works and certain requests. As an example, some additional pumps in a requested budget for the 2020 draft budget. Works that were done previously were the Nickel area storm reconstruction in 2017-2018 with some provincial funding, and that was financed over 30 years. There were works done in Rosemount, Olga Avenue, Knoll Street, and Humboldt. And I just wanted to point out that in 2021, we received some additional funding by the region that we are going to be using for wet weather flows. doing investigations in the Omer area, downspout disconnects, and a communication outreach. Staff have CCTV'd all of the sanitary system, and we're currently doing some analysis to see where the inflow and infiltration is. We even have a GoPro to video some of the manholes. We are going to be putting out a tender with regard to grouting and purging of those manholes that are, we hope, the low-hanging fruit that will help with the I&I to reduce some of that in wet weather flow. Mapping is also being done to understand our storm water system, and we're hoping to go out with our infrastructure needs study that include both the sanitary, water, and storm system along with the road system. That should be going out for RFP shortly. So just wanted to give council an update of what happened that day and also what we were going to be doing moving forward. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Kawamoto, for the update on a most unusual storm. Are there any questions from council to the particular report just delivered? Councillor Danch.
Thanks for that, Chris. I mean, no doubt it was an extraordinary amount of rain. I know in my retail biz, the sump pump business was pretty good. There's definitely some concerns in the Bartok area. I mean, I've had people reach out to me in that. It's not the first time, it's not the fifth time, it's probably the 9th or 10th time that area has been hit, and they get the sewage back up, and that, and I know you have to look at these people as well, but is there any like solid ideas coming up for that Bartok area? I mean, people want an answer over there, because there are a few that are willing to back out and and move out of that neighborhood that they love, and I don't think that's the answer. Of course, if you could just kind of enlighten us all, that'd be appreciated.
Mr. Kawamoto.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Danch. Absolutely, that obviously is going to be one of the areas that we are going to be focusing on with regard to our I&I and taking a look at our videos and seeing what we have. The other thing that we are going to be putting forward is a multitude of ideas to the 2021 budget, things like back water valves. As an example, taking a look at I&I through the sanitary sewer laterals and potentially helping residents out for that. Obviously going out with our infrastructure needs study and identifying those areas. So those are some things that Public Works is going to be submitting into the draft budget that would be able to help immediately and also help in the longer term. So there are a few ideas floating out there, especially with regard to our grouting and purging of the manholes to try to eliminate some of that inflow and infiltration, to reduce it with regard to our system, so that we can reduce the amount of sanitary backups.
Thank you, Councillor Danch. That's it. Councillor Beauregard.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair or Deputy Mayor, to the Director Kawamoto. Janet Street, Wellington, and I believe Clark and Humboldt as well. They're areas that frequently get flooded. And from my understanding, it has to do with what may have been a city decision a while back ago, filling in what used to be, I believe they were ditches, and then they just filled it in with rocks and didn't properly grade it, and has caused tremendous difficulties in that area. Is there any projects on the radar in that? Because I believe the city does have that on their radar, but I haven't really seen anything since I've been elected. So, thanks.
Mr. Kawamoto.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor. Unfortunately, I'm not aware of certain things that have happened historically throughout the city, as I've only been here 7.5 months, so I cannot speak to the decisions that were done previously. However, with regard to our infrastructure needs study, we will be looking at the entire area. The other thing that we have done is speak to the region and also try to understand where their pumping station is, where the bottlenecks are, and what we can do about them. Specifically in the Janet Clark area, there is the large influence of the pumping station that the region owns and operates. So that's another area where we will be investigating to see if there is something that they can help us out with.
Okay, thank you.
And I'll have Councillor Wells.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Through you to Director Kalamoto. Chris, there was a significant amount of water buildup at the intersection of Barber Drive and Second Concession. In your post-mortem mortem of the events, did you discover whether that was just a volume factor or was there actually cloggage in the drain there?
Mr. Kalamoto.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor. As of right now, knowing that, especially understanding the numbers with possibly 120 millimeters of rain, as I said before, there is no system that I know of in Ontario that would be able to handle such volume, especially in 7 hours that have come through as it fell that particular Saturday. We will be going out to take a look at those particular areas, as Second Con was one of the areas that we were called out and did have to pump. However, again, taking a look, we haven't seen anything that has jumped out at us with regard to the infrastructure in that particular area. However, we haven't done our fulsome investigation as of yet, just because it has been such a short period of time. So that is definitely something that we will be looking into. But again, taking a look at the volume, it would definitely cause flooding in almost everywhere in Ontario. But we will take a look at the system to see if there's anything that we could do to try to minimize any more issues in the future.
Thank you.
Councillor Wells, that's it. Director Kalamoto, I had one question, follow up to my colleague, Councillor Danch. With respect to that Bartok area, having been out there and seen the fellows there manning the pump, and we know about the end of Neff Street, and it's easy to armchair quarterback people that were on the ground that day as to where they place pumps. One of my concerns, having spoken to staff and the people there, was that it's my understanding that we had one 6-inch pump and a couple of 3-inch pumps. And so obviously a call was made by the on-call foreman to deploy them as he saw fit and which emergency came first. My question is, it's my understanding that the 6 inches of 2005, and if we only have, if this is true, one 6-inch pump, should we have another? And that may be for the draft budget you speak of, but my concern is that until we do that, we may not be faced with the same storm, but a serious storm. And Neff Street isn't fixed, and there is one 6-inch pump. Can you speak to the issue of whether we're going to be renting some pumps until that draft budget comes through? Or will we, because a 2005 pump kind of worries me that it's that many years old, and what if it failed and we had both those situations? So can you provide some enlightenment just for tonight until we get to your full report?
Yes, to you, Mr. Chair, you're absolutely correct. Actually, during the post-mortem, the lack of larger pumps was identified as one of the weaknesses that we do have with that staff pointed out. So you will be seeing that in the draft budget. And as you mentioned, might have been reading over our shoulders, we will be renting those pumps just in case as we move into the future. The other thing that we are doing is we are taking a look at the outfall on Neff Street. So that is another one where we will be looking to do some work. It does look fairly expensive, but it is one of the things that we have an engineer, I believe it's either this week or next week, going to be on site to take a look at that particular area because we know that it does cause some issues. So that might be in a future budget once we have an engineer take a look at it and see what needs to be done.
Thank you very much, Director Kawamoto. Councillor Bodnar.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I don't know whether it's just me, but it's very hard to hear your voice. And I don't know if it's on WeeStream, they're not going to be able to hear what you're saying. Anyways, through you to Chris. Chris, I take it that you looked at the drains in Ward 4 as to what was going on, although I didn't hear you directly say that, and that a post-mortem will be done on those too. Can you confirm that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, yes, we're actually going to be taking a look at any of the information that comes in and any information that we could take a look at. Obviously, the storm is now passed, so we can't see it at that time unless anybody has any pictures they would like to send in, which some residents have. So we're going to be taking a look at that, trying to understand our system. With regard to the infrastructure needs study, we are going to be taking a look at the system as a whole, and we are also taking a look at mapping where the systems go. So that is kind of all being done in parallel, all three of those things. So with all those things being completed, again, the longest one is the infrastructure needs study. Probably won't be done until end of spring, early summer next year. Then we'll have a more fulsome picture of what we're going to be doing and moving forward with capital requests, if there are any, to rectify any situations that we see fit.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bodnar, for that update on my mic here. They're just checking it here. Has anyone had any other issues on the screen that can't hear me? Councillor Kawamoto, or sorry, Director Kawamoto, you had difficulty too, as well?
Yes, my apologies, Mr. Chair. I have to lean in to hear you.
Great. Well, we're going to just pause for a minute and double check this. Thank you, Council. We'll just hold for a minute. Yes. Thank you, everyone. Any other comments to Director Kawamoto? No. We will move on to Councillor's remarks. Councillor Baggio.
I'm good, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Beauregard.
Ditto.
Thank you. Councillor Bodnar.
I'm good too, thanks.
Good. Councillor Danch.
Had a couple of issues. Staff's looking after it for me. Thank you so much.
Good. Councillor Califf.
I just have one issue, Deputy Mayor. It's really not an issue, it's actually a question. It's regarding the washrooms at the front of City Hall. If there's any way that they could be open for during the market time. I know that the city's been working with the BIA and they put in a new porta potty. I'm told that it was much improved, but there's still some issues with it, and having enough room for people to use it, as well as vendors being able to get to it, and having it one porta potty not really being enough. Is there any possibility that the washrooms at City Hall could be open if we perhaps asked the BIA if they could basically man them or be there to allocate the number of people, or check people going in and out, just to make sure that they were going only where they were supposed to be, and during the market hours? I'm not sure who I should ask about this, if it's Amber or if there's someone there from the market.
I'm advised that Mr. Long is on the line, and he
Oh,
will,
is Mr. Long on?
he
Okay.
will respond to that. Mr. Long?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Good evening, Council. Appreciate the councillor's question. We have been interacting with the BAA on this issue this spring. Up until now, we have said that City Hall washrooms are closed to the public, just given COVID restrictions. We have allocated additional staff, or certainly the resources of a contractor to deal with the washroom issue on Friday. We've also pointed folks towards the Harbor Master building as well. So I mean, we acknowledge that the current situation is not ideal, and we appreciate everybody's patience. But I know that the leadership team at the city are working on a plan to reopen City Hall in a sort of a slow and gradual way, perhaps starting this fall. But I don't want to speak out of turn from what the CAO may say on that topic. But I think for now we would prefer that vendors and attendees market use the portable washroom that is there, as well as the Harbor Master building down the street.
I think, Mr. Long, the difficulty comes from what I'm being told is that the vendors, some of them are by themselves, and it's very difficult for them to get away, to go to use the washroom, to go down there, or, you know, to stand in line to use even the portable washroom. I know it's difficult, but I'm just not sure why those washrooms are totally segregated, why that area at the front of City Hall couldn't at least be open just for several hours on Friday mornings, and then, you know, especially if they've got some volunteers who'd be willing to make sure people go in and out and doing things properly. I guess I'm just looking for some kind of a partnership here. I guess that there has been quite a few people very concerned about it. It's quite a distance to go down to have to get down to the canal side, and there's people that are out there walking all the time using that as well. So I just really question one washroom for all those people coming to the market, because the market has really picked up. I just wondered if maybe you could look at it once more ahead, and maybe there is a possibility of being able to work something out if BIA could provide volunteers to help man it and keep it safe for everybody. Can I leave it with you?
Yes, through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Yeah, certainly happy to take that back and discuss it with my colleagues, and we certainly value the partnership that we have with the BIA, and we're very pleased with the success that they've had this year in managing the farmers market, and certainly the attendance and the weather has been fantastic this year. So perhaps we could take that offline, and I'm happy to talk it over with my colleagues.
That would be great. Thank you very much.
Anything else, Councillor Califf? Very good.
That's good. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wells.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Through you to Director Kalamoto, I have three little things, all pertaining to the Pleasant Beach Road end. The first thing is there's the garbage and recycling enclosure that is there, and I know the region has taken some interest in it, in the situation that happened there this weekend. I was just wondering if that enclosure is actually restricted just to the fire lanes use, because the Pleasant Beach Road residents can have curbside pickup on Pleasant Beach Road. Can you just clarify that for me?
Mr. Kalamoto.
Through you, Mr. Chair, my apologies to Councillor Wells with the manager being off, who does know some of the history behind it, and me being unable to contact the supervisor today. I unfortunately do not have the history. In my 7.5 months, it hasn't come up, so I will definitely take a look into that, about the use of it and who should be using that particular asset municipal asset and get back to the councillor.
Councillor Wells?
Thank you. Maybe just I'll wait for a response on regards to the gate. I know I sent you some information today and that you're probably working on it. One last thing though is in regards to the small May to October parking signs, it appears like someone has been stealing them. I just was wondering if that's just a mistake on my observation or if that's actually what's happening.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, I hope that people aren't stealing them. They actually should be. They should be taken off as that restriction is year round. So my apologies if staff did put them up by mistake as we misread it. But going back and rereading the original particular bylaw, that area should be restricted year round.
Councillor Wells?
Thank you. I just also just that. So the signs that appear to be missing are not being taken down by the city. They are actually being scooped up by maybe some people in that area.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, that is a high probability. If there are only a few missing, as staff go down, we will remove all of them.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wells.
That's all my questions.
Thank you, Director Colmo. Any others? No? We will now move to consideration of items requiring separate discussions. Tonight we'll begin with item 7.1, Public Works Department Report number 2021-211. Subject, Port Colborne Municipal Drain Meeting to consider. Moved by Councillor Bodner, second by Councillor Bagu. There were 5 written submissions pertaining to Public Works Department Report 2021-211, Port Colborne Municipal Drain Meeting to consider, having been received by the clerk's office and were distributed to council prior to tonight's meeting. Alana Vanderveen, Drainage Superintendent, will provide a verbal presentation and then introduce Paul Marsh, engineer from EWA Engineering, Inc., who will provide a presentation and answer questions from council. Alana, if you could.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So through you, Deputy Mayor, to council and affected members of the Port Colborne Drain Watershed. Tonight, Mr. Paul Marsh of EWA Engineering will be presenting his findings and rationales that comprise the Port Colborne Municipal Drainage Report. Through the requirements of the Drainage Act, this official step is known as the meeting to consider, which is the start of the public process. This step is to ensure the report is complete and free of gross errors. As Deputy Mayor commented, typically the members would have the option to come forward and ask any questions directly to the engineer. However, due to COVID, those submissions those delegations were submitted to the clerk's office prior to this meeting. So once discussions on the report have commenced, council will have 2 options. One, they can refer the report back to the engineer should gross errors be revealed, or proceed to the Court of Revision. Should council agree to move the report forward to the Court of Revision, a panel of 3 representatives must be chosen. It is not a requirement that the panel members be members of the council, but those members must be eligible to run for council. The Court of Revision is a forum where property owners have the opportunity to appeal their assessment should they feel they have just reason to do so. At this point, I'll turn the floor over to Mr. Marsh for his presentation.
Mr. Marsh?
Thanks, Alana, and Chair and members of council. I'm going to share my screen, and I hope everything works. Alana, can you just give me a thumbs up that you can hear me and the screen's visible? Great, thank you. The agenda we have in the presentation, and I'm going to try to not make it too drawn out, is the Port Colborne drain history, some of the past work that's been done, the basis for design, and the why of we were in this position in the first place, the design storm hydrology and hydraulics, and I do have some data from the recent storm that I can present in comparison to what we're using for design, cost estimate and the assessments. So the drain, we changed the name, and it was Henry Ben Mears' idea to change the name to the Port Colborne. Originally, the Port Colborne drain outletted through the industrial property. Why can I not think of the name? Valet's current property. And it was suggested to move away from W1, W2, and M1 and M2 from those drains and give them actual names. The boundary was adjusted. The original report abandoned the Port Colborne name in 1911. And a lot of the drainage has been impacted by the quarry, which will be the subject of conversation. The drain doesn't change very much. It has an outlet in the Wignall drain, as the Wignall drain was originally written up in 1973 in the C.J. Clark report, which at that time had proposed a pumping station, and it had a zero grade line from basically the Friendship Trail south to the outlet. This is from the region's publicly accessible information, which is the 1934 satellite image or air photo image. And it shows the drain at that time, and it clearly extended all the way up to Second Concession. You can see that at that time, it just went straight through with the little dip through here. And there was the W2A and 2B that's over here east of Babylon Road. This is an image prepared by the City of Port Colborne and provided to the previous engineer on the project, outlining what pathways there were at that time and what pathways in red were considered historical pathways. And again, you can see that it went up to the Second Concession and it ended just north of Highway 3. This is the report from 1999 prepared by Weeb Engineering, and it shows the western portion of the Wignall drain, referred to as W1, to be abandoned in 1999. They're only abandoning the lower half of it, the top half having already been consumed by the quarry, but we couldn't find any previous reports that abandoned the upper half. So this report only abandons the lower half, and the abandonment goes to the north side of Highway 3. In that report to the east, the drain was realigned. The dotted yellow line was the original path. The blue line, which I've marked on the plan prepared by Weeb Engineering, shows the path that was the eventual design. It shows the grade line below in profile. This was the subject of a tribunal hearing, which resulted in this plan being the adjusted plan. In 2013, K-Smart and Associates prepared another report to abandon the half that was east of Babylon Road, referred to as W2, W2A, and W2B. The red line, which I put on there, is the new watershed line. The furthest easternmost part was to be switched and put into what's called the M2 part of the Michener drain. A maintenance effort to clean north of the Friendship Trail was undertaken in 2016, and as a part of that work, it was decided to realign it in the area south of Highway 3. This is the plan prepared at that time, and I have a couple of images. I think that from late 2018 or 2019, The yellow arrow shows the basic direction of the views looking up the drain after it had been realigned in this area. The contour lines in the plan view show the contour lines based on the original flow path.
We're just going to take a break here for a second, Mr. Marsh. Staff will be working on the technology here.
Sure.
Apparently you're back now and we can hear you. Proceed. Can you hear me, Mr. Marsh?
Yeah, I can.
Sorry, you can proceed now.
Okay. This identifies 3 studies that we prepared as part of this project. Under the Drainage Act, it's not required to do a baseline study report. It's something that I like to do, in part because it allows us to look at the history of the drain and identify the parts of the drain that need specific work. As part of the Port Colborne baseline report, that speaks to what needed to be improved. The Wignall watershed report looks at the watershed as a whole, and the Port Colborne drain is a portion of the Wignall watershed. And so that hydrology and hydraulics report talks to how the watershed functions and looks at the capacities. And then finally, in April 16th, 2021, the municipal drainage report was prepared after we had done some amendments at the MTO's request. This is identifying both past work and current work as we understand needed to be completed. The badges in yellow are the proposed work, and the badges in white are past work. So this red line here shows the W1 abandoned in 1999. This shows the portion that was abandoned in 2013. The drain at that time then ended on Babian Road East, and it was part of the scope of this assignment to extend it to the second concession on the east side of Babian Road. That's proposed in 2021. Much of that channel already exists, and it's only the last 250 meters of it that needs to be completed. There's a proposed branch drain requested by the city on a petition for request, which is for sufficient outlet for the Snyder Road. There is an existing channel that passes through up here that's related to, but is not the same as the channel that was originally abandoned. And in order to make that connection, there's another 250 meters that would need to be extended from approximately this location to Snyder Road. The section that still exists and has never stopped being a drain is the proposed maintenance from south of the Highway 3 to the confluence with the new part that was realigned in 2016. The cost of the realignment and the cost of the maintenance in 2016 is to be billed as a part of this report, and I have some information on that. When we started this study, there was new information available from the NPCA, which was their 1 meter contour lines assembled between 2010 and 2012 from orthophoto imagery captured by an aircraft. And we used those contour lines and these blue arrows to look at flows over the land that are orthogonal or perpendicular to the contour lines. And from that, we identify where the splits are, where water flows one direction or another. In some cases, we supplement this with survey data or with drainage or roadside swale information provided by the city. And in some cases, we go out and look at it to see if we can see which way things go. This is the work as it's shown in the report. This is the proposed extension of the work of the east side drain that's already present up to the second concession. It includes relaying the existing culverts so that they connect to the extended drain. There's a perched PVC culvert that I'll show in a second. And this in red is the original maintenance and the realignment completed in 2016. So it's already done. And the maintenance that's needed on the proposed branch number 1, the original W1 drain. And this extension to Snyder Road to provide an outlet for the road to drain from the north to the south and through this area. This is from the plan profiles, or the profile prepared, and it's on the east side of Babylon Road, and it's showing this is an existing culvert that is functioning, works well. This is the perched culvert, and by perched, it means that it's too high. It's no longer, I don't think it would ever going to be sitting on a grade line. This is our proposed grade line, and this is where we're proposing to relay the culverts. One is going in at a similar grade, and the other is going in at a deeper grade in order to switch water to run from the west across Babylon Road and then south across the second concession, and then proceed on the east side of Babylon Road down to this existing culvert and down the east side of Babylon Road to the existing crossing of the drain on Babylon Road. How we do that through design is we set up a design storm. The design storm that we used in this is the Soil Conservation Service, or SCS, 24-hour storm. There was a time when we would use an Environment Canada AES storm, but we're tending now to use the Soil Conservation Storm as being more representative. This is called a volume or a mass curve, and I just want to point out that the 30% of the amount of rain falls in a very narrow period in the very middle, and it makes what's kind of a peaky storm, and so it has a very specific runoff profile. It's considered suitable for agricultural watersheds, which is why we use this in ag studies. This table is coming out of the Environment Canada intensity, duration, frequency charts, where for each return period, we pick a volume of rain over 24 hours, and this provides the shape of the storm, and this provides the volume of the storm. This is the actual storm from July 17th. I picked the data up from the Regional Municipality of Niagara's website. They publish it online for download. It's from the Port Colborne wastewater treatment plant, I believe. It's not totally clear where the station is, but it's showing it in 0.25 millimeter increments, which is typical for a tipping bucket precipitation gauge. And this shows here that sometime at about 8 o'clock in the morning, there was a peak in 5 minutes of a 5 millimeter event or portion, which is equivalent to 100 millimeters per hour as an instantaneous rate, which is very high. The overall storm was measured at 102 millimeters in 14.4 hours. And that one of the challenges you can see in this is there was an initial storm that came through, a slight pause, and then this very intense part. And so this means there was no available infiltration. This would have used up all the infiltration, and then when this intense period came through, it would be almost converted to all runoff. So in many ways, a very challenging storm to do. The blue diamond shows where this would occur on that probability chart of intensity, duration, frequency. It's 14.4 hours according to that gauge measurement. If we just call that 12 hours, it's a 50-year return period storm. If we call it 24 hours, it's greater than a 25 period rainstorm. And it indicates it's not a design event that we would use to design our storm system or our drainage, agricultural drainage system for. It's an event that exceeds our drain criteria. And you can see here it's 68.5 millimeters is what we're aiming for. This exceeds that by a substantial amount. I have a colleague, Jordan, who's a drainage superintendent, one of the drainage superintendents in Chatham-Kent, and he reported, not that storm, but a previous one in June, they had 9.44 inches in just 2 hours, which is an extraordinary event. And I think there's a thing that's possibly happening here with nearshore communities in the Great Lakes Basin experiencing climate change and the visibility of high intense storms. You know, we have had storms, you can see these circles here, we have had storms like this in the past, but climate change tells us that they're likely to be more frequent and potentially more intense. We take that design storm, and this is software that interfaces to the EPA, U.S. Environmental Protection Agency model for stormwater management. You get a plan view showing the catchments. They link together through trapezoidal channels similar to this, and it produces hydrographs indicating the outputs for the Wignall watershed. This is the Port Colborne drain showing it at a particular point in time and how the receiver outletting at Wignall, where there's a 0 grade line, is rate full, which is kind of what we'd expect to find. As part of that hydrologic model, there's a part of it that we use, it's called the curve number method, part of the Soil Conservation Service, and it uses two things. One is a percent impervious. The model converts all runoff from impervious areas to flow, but the rest of the land uses a curve number or a CN number based on the type of land use in the catchment area to make a prediction of runoff. There's other parameters that go into it, but those are the two primary ones. We did a sample of one part of the watershed, and we added up the total impervious areas, and in that sample it works out to about 4.5 as a percent impervious as an overall watershed mixed rural residential with farmland. And so we used 4.5 as impervious areas for most of those runoffs. This is a spreadsheet that sets up, the model produces this target design flow, and we then look at the Manning's coefficient and Manning's predictions for what the capacity of each individual drainage ditch is or drainage channel, and assess whether it meets the predicted flows. Once we've done that, we look at actual survey cross sections that show what the actual channel has, and we assess what its capacity looks at. And finally, as part of the hydraulics, which is what this assessment is, we look at individual culverts using software from the United States. It's just culvert analysis software, and predicts how well or if it meets the same design flows. The cost estimate is primarily the extension of those two pieces, the one along Babian Road and the one for the petition 4 outlet to serve Snyder Road, and the maintenance work on the portion of the existing drains south of Highway 3. The realignment that was done reused excavated material to fill in the old channel, and the remainder of it was spread on adjacent banks. That's what we do in Babian Road, the extension there. It's a little tricky because the berms to the east make it a little bit of a congested site, but we believe that what's going to come out of that extension will fit in that area without having to truck any of it away. As part of our estimate, we know there's a cost of environmental protection, but it's very difficult to estimate ahead of time. We have to comply with all relevant legislation for both species at risk, but as well as the Department of Fisheries and Oceans for sediment. Those are costs that the project has to bear. So of those works, Roughly 54,000 is a budget for the estimated cost of construction, including maintenance and the extension of those pieces. The previous construction is composed of these amounts. The two fordings amounted to this. Engineering costs on this are quite high, and I'll speak to that in a moment. There's administration cost allowances as well, and there's drain allowances, and I'll speak to allowances in another slide in a second. The first engineer was appointed about 2003. It was Weeb Engineering. They subsequently went bankrupt, and there was an invoice submitted and paid by the town. That's been apportioned to both Michener, the Wignall, and the Port Colborne drain by area. So the amount apportioned to Port Colborne is 30,000 roughly. AMEC was hired to do work in 2013. I believe they quit doing work 2016 and ceased to be interested in the project in 2017. And they submitted an invoice and wanted more money, which wasn't forthcoming. And so that portion is assigned to the Port Colborne to cover as well. This was also talked about in the Michener drain previously. My engineering costs were quoted and are this number. Portions of the plans were prepared by the City of Port Colborne's drafting staff. That's this number. There was a debenture taken out for the work that was done. The debenture fee as a portion of all work that the debenture was taken out for is this amount, and the interest on the debenture as a portion of total. Some of the other work was for Wignall, so the remainder of the debenture will be charged to Wignall is this amount. And so these are the past costs that were recorded as part of engineering and admin. Under assessment principles, briefly about allowances, just to make sure everybody's clear, allowances aren't coming from the city. Allowances are paid from one watershed person to another watershed person. It's a neighbor to neighbor recognition of money. And so whenever we create an allowance, it's a neighbor getting money from their other neighbors. In some engineers, they've switched and are taking the municipal assessment, the value of property, as the one that they use, and I'm not a big fan of that. I prefer that we just take the agricultural value of all land, and everybody gets the same value for property that has to be taken. As part of Section 29, if we create a new drain and it goes over someone's property, they're entitled to compensation for land taken, and it's the drain top width that we make a payment for them for however long that is happening. Section 29, if we spread that excavated material on their land adjacent to the drain, it's recognized it has an impact on cultivation, and so there's a value paid for that in reduced productivity. We take the same value before, except 1/20th. Damages, this is Section 30. My preference is to pay damages on crops or commercial losses, where someone's soybean field gets trampled by an excavator and then the spoils get spread on it and then a bulldozer spreads it out. There's a soybean damage there that's irrecoverable by that landowner. And so we pay compensation where that's affecting their ability to make a living. Where someone has their grass torn up or a garden disturbed or stuff that they value, but it doesn't affect their income in any way, we do, as part of the contract, restore to a like or better condition, but we don't make a payment for damages. On trees, it's a contentious subject across drainage for trees. And our belief is it's better to replace 2 trees for any 1 tree affected. If a tree is right in the middle of the drain, it has to be removed. Some trees that are within the working allowance have to be removed. And as long as the tree qualifies for the program, and I probably shouldn't say 2 trees for 1 tree, it's 2 saplings for 1 tree. So you're not getting, a brand new great big tree, you're getting a sapling as a replacement. which is why we're doing 2. And part of this is we want to recognize the value of trees, specifically the tree canopy in the city of Port Colborne. When we have typically a petition for request, and we've had a couple of these in the Wignall watershed, where the road authority wants an outlet recognized, it's often an existing channel that makes a connection, but the roadway doesn't have an official outlet. It's a section 31 where we're converting what is a private drain to a part of a municipal drain so that the municipality can ensure that it's always working and that they have the right of entry to fix anything. And so that's what's happening on Snyder Road. When we do this, there's a payment made for the value of the drain that was created by a private person. In this case, many of those drains pre-existed, and so they weren't really created by a person, they were paid for in the past. And so here I don't have any section 31 compensations, except no, there's none. Assessment principles on benefits. Where we're creating a brand new drain or the drain is getting changed in an alignment, there's a section 22 benefit where someone is right beside the drain, and a budding benefit. This is often calculated, there's a guideline provided to us engineers, and we're supposed to calculate the benefit based on the value that the upstream property gains by having the improvement in the drain. So when we have a drain that isn't changed materially from what it used to be, but it's exactly the same as what it used to be, the service hasn't changed in any way, then we don't look to section 22 as a way to assess costs, because if we're just doing maintenance or small improvements, there's not huge benefits that are realized by upstream landowners. Section 23 is composed of 2 parts, outlet liability and outlet benefit. They're 2 distinct things, but as engineers, we often put them together as one thing just because it's simpler that way. Outlet liability is where you're as a property owner that produces runoff, you're responsible that doesn't damage downstream owners. And the outlet benefit is by having drainage, you gain a benefit that the water is going somewhere and not just staying on your property. So they're very similar, but slightly different. We use the recommended assessment method of equivalent area runoff, which is recognizing how much runoff comes off each property. We have made an allowance for adjusting for stormwater management features that are specific to individual properties. There aren't any in this assessment. Section 24 is a special benefit. This directly affects the 2 fordings, where 50% of the cost is borne by the landowner as a benefit, and 50% is borne by the watershed. So it's a cost sharing around specific features that ensure property isn't cut off. And then section 26 is specific assessments to roads and utilities, where because of the road, the drainage is impaired or has a higher requirement. So culverts under roads are almost always 100% assessed to the road, and utilities, if they have to be moved, are assessed as a cost to utilities. So a road allowance will get assessed under section 23, and if there's any special works that are required, they'll get an additional assessment under 26. I wanted to have a discussion about section 23 and how in the Drainage Act, it's typically set up as a share of the peak capacity. So this drain is sized for a 1 in 5 year storm, and everybody is basically paying for a piece of that represents a proportional amount for what they're contributing. But it's the peak that determines the size of all the infrastructure. It's not the volume of what comes off, it's the peak of the 1 in 5 year event. And in that, I've done a couple of comparisons of properties here where it's the area, and we use a C factor to adjust for land use. And I wanted to point out that you kind of have 2 farms here. One could be growing soybeans and the other is an unused farm. we're directed to assess them both in the same way as a farm, because that's how they are. If one's unused, it could be used in the future, but it's not the drain that determines whether the farm gets used or not. So we don't adjust based on who's cropping what or doing what practices. If it's a farm, it gets assessed a certain way. This is the property information provided to me. I've used GIS to color code, and it shows 6 categories of property: commercial, farm, industrial, institutional, land, and residential. So anything in pink is considered a residential property. Anything in blue is considered vacant land. Anything in green is considered a farm. Industrial is the salmon colored. And then the light pink is the institutional, which is the school just on the east side of Port Colborne. So I use this as part of my input into choosing C values. I know as part of the delegations, a number of people have raised issues about C values. This is a color-coded map showing the C values. And I'll just point out one part here that I know I've made an intervention on. This property here in the corner, south of the drain where it bends around the west side of Babylon, this is shown as rural residential, and this one is shown as farm. And when I did it, I treated them both as rural residential and gave them both a CN of 25. So where I look at the satellite or the air photo image, I can intervene in specific places, but generally we're setting up CM numbers to represent classes of properties. None of this is used to calculate anything in the design of the drain. It's only used as a methodology to apportion costs between the participants in the drain, between the watershed landowners. And the other part that's not shown here is all the roadways. Roadways are generally all 85 as a CN. I think the MTO is slightly higher than 85, but I can't remember exactly what that one was. So one thing to point out here is that where we make small tweaks in CN, so if we take an individual property and we change it from 35 to 33, all other things being equal, it changes that assessment by $29. That $29 has to then be picked up by all the rest of the landowners. And so you can adjust and tweak C factors. You just got to recognize you're moving around $20, $30 at a time. And that has to be picked up somewhere else. So someone could go down and then pick up costs from somewhere else, and some will change, some won't. As part of this, I had a discussion with OMAF about the assessments where there's a portion of it that's pumped. And these are the tags from the pumps in the quarry. The newer one is the one from the west side, and the older one where the model number got a little dinged up there and is hard to read is on the east side. Based on the model one being a T6A, which you guys probably can't read, but it's on the tag. This is the pump curve, and it indicates it operates somewhere between 15 liters per second and 35 liters per second. And the reason the OMAFRA was interested in the pumps is that if that rate is higher than the assessed rate, then there's a basis for increasing the assessed rate of the quarry. And so I had to look at that. And those pumping rates aren't larger than their proportional share of that runoff would be. And so there really wasn't a basis based on the pumps to say that they should be paying a higher rate. And the other challenge with the quarries is that they don't run the pumps during the storm. They shut them off and they wait and they pump later after the peak is passed. And so their property is not directly connected to the drain. It's only connected to the drain through the pumps. And so they operate in the drainage system like a large pond where the water is stored, captured, and pumped out at a later date. or a later time. That concludes my presentation, and I believe it's over to you, Alana.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, or Deputy Mayor, at this point, council will have time to ask any questions that they may have.
Thank you, Alana. Thank you, Mr. Marsh. Excellent presentation. Made it much easier to understand with your slide presentation and the way you put it forward. I just wanted to ask Mr. Marsh and Alana before proceeding to council, were the written submissions then, in your belief, incorporated into that slideshow or answered? Or did you want to comment on any of them? Otherwise, I'll just turn to the councillors now.
I did the slideshow quite a while ago, and so some of the early ones that I knew about, so I knew a week ago that C factors were an issue people had, so I was able to address that. Some of the ones that came in Friday that I saw Friday at 5, the presentation doesn't address those.
Fine. Alana, did you want to address them, or I can turn to council first and see if they might be one and the same?
What we can do is let council ask their questions first, and then we'll follow with the delegations after that.
Very good. Thank you. Councillor Bonder? Can you still hear me, Councillor?
Yeah, you're a little bit breaking up there. Were you talking to me? Sorry.
Yes, sorry.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so Alana, through you, Deputy Mayor, to Alana, you said we'll hear from the delegations. Are we actually going to have people speaking to that? No. How are we going to hear from the delegations? Are you going to read the letter, or give me a little background here?
Through you, Deputy Mayor. What I'll do is summarize the questions that I had pulled out of those delegations, just to keep it a little bit shorter than reading the actual letter. Some of them are quite lengthy.
Right. Okay. So I guess I'm going to hold my some of my questions until you get done. Maybe are you going to attempt to answer some of those, or point out where they've been answered by Mr. Marsh in the presentation?
For you, Deputy Mayor, yes. I've gone through and, like I said, pulled out all the questions that I could find in their responses. And then Paul and I tend to kind of tag team and answer as much as we can. Would you prefer that the delegations go before the council?
Well, I don't want to, I want to hear what you guys have to say, because that hopefully they'll answer a lot of the questions that all of us have received. So I guess yeah, I'm going to wait till after I hear what you say. Okay, that's good for me, Deputy Mayor, right now.
Thank you, Councillor Bodner. I'll go to Councillor Califf, and if there's no one else, we'll circle back to that presentation, and Councillor Bodner again. Councillor Califf.
Through you, Deputy Mayor, to Alana. I just wondered, we had a letter come through from the MTO that was addressed to you with some concerns regarding this. Could you fill us in on that and give us your thoughts regarding that letter?
Alana?
Yes, certainly. So that is one of the delegations that was received. And so it was Mr. Kyle Saunders from the MTO had identified 2 concerns. One, that Mr. Marsh was hired by the city to complete a drainage study, which modified the ministry's drainage system. And I will have Paul speak to that.
Mr. Marsh?
Yeah, so as part of this MTO, Kyle was new to the project, and MTO had some staff turnover, so we had some new staff that were inquiring about the project. And when we reviewed our original proposal for what to do in last year, they weren't in favor of that. And so we revised it and changed the design. to accommodate MTO's requirements and went back to no changes, to the drain being exactly as it was before. And so they were asking for a bunch of analysis to be done. And because we weren't changing any part of the drain, they were proposed to be pretty much the way they used to be in terms of the amount of area that they served north of Highway 3. We were agreeing to make those analyses if MTO paid for the analysis and it wasn't to be borne by all of the watershed. And MTO wasn't willing to agree to that. And so we didn't analyze if the proposed no changes would meet MTO's criteria for culvert crossings, which I think is a reasonable position to take with the drain report. That if MTO wants a collection of special analysis that meets their requirements, they ought to be willing to pay for it. And they shouldn't be expecting all of the landowners in the watershed to pay for that analysis when there is no change going on upstream of their culverts. So it's a bit of a disagreement as to the amount of engineering analysis that's needed in order for this to go forward. We did make changes at MTO's request from our original plan, which went back to the original drain alignments. And we feel that now that we've made those changes, we shouldn't have to analyze the culverts that aren't being changed. Have I got that? I mean, do you want to add anything in that, Alana?
Could I ask one more little piece of it? He ended his delegation for this evening by saying that they would challenge us if we approved it. How do you feel about that? Like that's a pretty strong statement.
No, Alana and I talked about that, and I would welcome the opportunity to have that discussion with the MTO at the tribunal. That they are requesting analysis and are refusing to pay for the analysis that they requested in the hopes that all of the people in the watershed would pay instead when there's no change or no substantive change proposed in the drain. And we're largely doing maintenance in order to satisfy what's going on in their area. So I'd be quite happy to have that debate in front of a tribunal with MTO representatives.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cleof. Alana, is there any other councillors wanting to speak on that? I'll go to Alana and Mr. Marsh then to address the questions, and then back to Councillor Bodner.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, or Deputy Mayor. So the second question or concern that Mr. Saunders had as well was that MTO wasn't provided notification. As a requirement of the Drainage Act, every landowner within the watershed is notified of this meeting to consider. Every owner within the watershed has the opportunity to come forward with any concerns. A mailing was sent out to the MTO. Perhaps it didn't make it directly to Mr. Saunders, but that's not something that we can control with their internal mailing system. But I assure you that the mailing was sent. So circling back to the first of the delegations, the first one was from Sandra and George Beaulieu, and I had identified 5 concerns that they had. The first one was respect to the municipal water rate, which is not reflective at all of the Drainage Act or the Port Colborne drain, so we won't be speaking to that. The second concern that they had was the altering of the watershed and the pre-existing drainage paths. Mr. Marsh has commented on this in his slide or in his presentation. I don't know if there's anything further that you would like to add, Paul, to that?
No, it's just to reiterate that the new information provided by NPCA is a higher quality data set than would have been available in 1999 when the original work was done, or in 1979 when the RVA work was done in feet and inches. And so as part of that review, we make adjustments to the catchment boundary. In a lot of cases with their contour lines, it's very easy to see where the berms for the quarry go, and they form a lot of the basis for where water switches from where it's going, east, west, north, south.
The third point of concern was the ministry consulted on the works performed? Yes, with any drainage works that we do, the appropriate approvals are sought prior to executing the work. So I'm not entirely sure if the question was reflective of the drainage works that take place or of the quarry activities. With respect to the quarry activities, the municipality has no authority or no knowledge of what permitting is required for that. I can only speak to what's required for the drainage activities, and yes, those were all confirmed or received. The fourth question or concern is, the quarry appears to be the only benefiting properties from this report. Shouldn't those that cause the change pay for the changes? Mr. Marsh, can I ask you to speak to that?
Sure. Thank you, Alana. Deputy Mayor, through you. Yes, the quarry and everyone else benefits from these changes. For the specific road portions, the petition 4 on Snyder Road, the city is picking up the cost of those changes. For the changes in the culverts, in order to meet the alignment, the city's picking up the cost of those changes. For the realignment along Babian Road, this probably should have been done a long time ago rather than waiting till now, but it's being assessed as a watershed benefit because in a large part it connects the lands north of the second concession to a sufficient outlet. Right now on the west side, it's not a sufficient outlet. It doesn't make a suitable connection to the existing drain. Back to you, Alana.
The fifth concern was restoration of the quarry to passive lakes. I'm not entirely sure how to answer this aside from the way we the way the reports are completed is to reflect how the land is currently used. So is it possible that the quarries become passive lakes? Yes, but those are not being designed for at this time. And I can't speak further to that. I don't know what the original agreement was through planning of these quarry properties and if they were supposed to become passive lakes or not passive lakes, or when, how long after the quarry has been used up. So I'm not going to answer any more on that question. The second delegation was from Mr. Jack Linga, and I have identified 11 concerns from the delegation that he had provided. So the first concern was a renaming of the Colborne drain. This drain already exists. Why are we reusing that name? As Mr. Marsh had showed in his presentation, that the drain did exist a number of years ago. The last or the most recent documentation that I have is from the 1900s, early 1900s, showing that the Port Colborne drain only or existed from the outlet of the lake through Vale property up to the now Friendship Trail. So we're not duplicating a name. We're just reusing a name in hopes to eliminate some of the W1, W2, 1A, 1B scenario, so that people actually know that the Port Colborne drain starts at the Friendship Trail, heads north, and ends at Second Concession and Babian Road. The Port Colborne branch drain starts just south of Highway 3 and ends at Snyder Road. There's one drain and one branch. It's very clear, very concise on what the drains are now. The second concern that he had, comments about the most recent storm being greater than a 1 in 5 year storm. Mr. Marsh has already answered this throughout his presentation, so I don't believe anything further is required for that. Point 3 was abandonment of the previous drain north of Highway 3 through what is now Pit 2. Again, Mr. Marsh has already answered this through his report. I don't know if he has anything further to offer.
No, I don't think so. It's the opportunity from the original abandonment to recognize an existing drain. We're not making a payment to the quarry for that use that's on their land now, in part because we're assuming they got paid when the drain was created originally. And so the opportunity to make a sufficient outlet for Snyder Road through that existing channel seems suitable without paying the quarry for the land that would be taken.
Along with the delegation that was provided, a number of photos were provided, as you would have seen in the package that was provided to you. Mr. Halinga points out that there was minimal accumulation for the July 17th storm on Snyder Road. There is water all over the road allowance because it has nowhere to go. So what we're trying to do is provide that branch drain of the Port Colborne drain to allow for the water to flow there to the Port Colborne drain. Point number 5, Mr. Halinga has pointed out there's a missing roll number from the assessment schedules. He comments that the third house on the north side of Highway 3 is unaccounted for. That roll is within the assessment schedule, so I'm not sure if he just missed it or, but it is there, it is accounted for. Point number 6, there is an adequate ditch on the west side of Babian Road. Why is the east side being proposed for the drain? As Mr. Marsh had explained through his presentation, the drain is being extended along the east side of Babian Road from the existing end of what was previously abandoned all the way to the north, Second Concession Road. The reason for this, yes, there is a ditch on the west side of the road. However, it's not safe for traveled use. The idea is to move the drain off of the road allowance back onto private property so we can eliminate that deep ditch closer to the traveled portion. Although it's not a busy road, there is still traffic there, and it's in the interest of safety that the drain be pushed back off onto private property. Question number 7 Mr. Halinga had was the culverts at the intersection of the Babian Road, questioning if they are adequate. Yes, the city understands that these culverts are adequately sized. However, with the changes of the drain, the deep ditch from the west being moved, the drain over to the east side of Babian Road, those culverts need to be relayed to change the water from going this way to now this way. Although it is a very minimal slope, as Port Colborne is extremely flat, there is still some grade change that needs to be addressed, and that's why those culverts will be relayed. Question 8, Mr. Halinga questioned the runoff coefficient that Mr. Marsh has used in his report. Paul, would you like to speak to that?
Well, sure. Through you, Deputy Mayor, I was really hoping that by using the C factor is that this would not be debated, because the C factors are really an accepted, standardized way of looking at manipulation of runoff. And I think Mr. Halinga got the mistaken idea that I was actually using the rational method to size the drain. We're not doing that. The drain is sized using a computer model and with a whole different style of analysis. The C factor is only used as a way to share costs amongst like properties. And in this, he's identifying that some of the C factors should be different for urban residential. And in the city, when you look at a block of area, you can see the houses and the property sizes. Yes, there's a very distinct C factor. We'd go with that. But in this case, it's an agricultural drainage catchment, and all the properties are considered rural residential. And so we're treating them as one type of thing that shares the same cost. When you look at farms and it's a row crop farm growing soybeans, that bare field has a greater chance of running off. If it's vacant land just growing nothing, then yes, it doesn't have the same runoff profile. But we're told to prepare assessments as though a farm is a farm. And so from 1 year, if it's pasture, or another year, if it's row crops, we just look at the row crops as a C factor, which is the potential for the farm to contribute runoff. We don't go in and adjust C factors from year to year to reflect the type of farming or the type of cropping that's being done.
Comment number 9 on page 7 of the delegation is questioning the assessment schedules. I do not entirely understand this question, but I believe the following will provide the correct answer. Within the report, there are 2 assessment schedules. The first assessment schedule is for the entirety of the Port Colborne Drain, which is at the starts at the confluence with the Wignall Drain, just south of the Friendship Trail, and ends all the way, or drains all the way up to second concession on Babian Road. So everyone within that first assessment schedule, and that's the entirety of the watershed. The second assessment schedule is only reflective of those that are on branch 1. So all people will be in the entire watershed. Only certain people will be in branch 1. So, like I said, I'm not sure if I didn't understand the question that was being asked, and perhaps Mr. Holinga can reach out to me at a separate time to be able to get a little bit clarity on that particular question. The 10th question was, why are the costs to maintain, construct the drain, why are there costs to maintain, construct a drain that was abandoned in 2013? Mr. Marsh gave a pretty thorough explanation of that in his report, or in his slideshow previously. So I'm not going to touch any further on that. And the last question Mr. Holinga had was when a meeting to discuss these works was held. So the most recent meetings for this particular drain were held October 24th, 2018 and March 7th, 2019, where the majority of all of these changes were discussed. The third delegation is from Mr. Saunders, the MTO, which we've already touched upon, so I'll skip over that one. The fourth delegation is from David and Janet Henderson, and I have identified 2 concerns. So the first concern was no access of drainage to the then Wignall, now Port Colborne drain prior to 2008. So yes, the property previously drained to the north and to another watershed. And the changes were made in 2008, my apologies, to the roadside ditching system to address these concerns. In doing so, the limits of both watersheds have changed, and this is now being reflected within the Port Colborne drain. Again, the second concern is the resident is disputing the runoff coefficients factors used by the engineer. Mr. Marsh, I don't know if you want to add any more to that or if you've had enough.
I think we've been over that one okay enough so far.
Okay. And the fifth delegate was from Betty Conk, and 3 concerns were identified. The first one being the runoff coefficients have been improperly exercised. My last comment, I believe that Mr. Marsh has explained this thoroughly through his presentation and the last couple of comments that he had referred to. And the other question is about the methodology that was used, which again, Mr. Conk has gone over that a number of times. Sorry, did I say Mr. Conk? Mr. Marsh, my apologies. Mrs. Conk is requesting that the report be referred back to the engineer for review. And I don't think that Mr. Marsh has anything further to add. Do you?
No.
The second concern from Mrs. Conk is, why were we reinstating an abandoned drain and will the duplication of the names not be confusing? So again, Mr. Marsh has already explained that throughout his presentation for the abandonment, what was abandoned and what is currently still a drain. And I believe the names, we've already discussed that. It was to help provide clarity to know what is what, as opposed to W1, W2, 1A, 1B, and so forth. There were a lot of extra little branches that it just kind of kept getting tacked on in years previous, but this new report will make things very simple.
Great, thank you very much. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Alana.
Sorry, one last point of concern. I support Colborne Quarry not paying for the changes if they are the ones who have caused the issues with the drainage. And Mr. Marsh, can I ask you to speak to that?
Yeah, I have a significant amount of sympathy for Ms. Conk on this one, and I would agree that I would like for the quarry to pay as much as possible. And I can't arbitrarily adjust their assessment just to make them pay more. I have identified a methodology and I've followed through with that methodology, and I have treated everybody in the watershed the same within that methodology. The quarry is a challenge to assess because there's other industrial lands within the Wignall watershed, and they're a roof with a large pave area, and they're connected directly to the bower drain. And so there's no question they're a high C factor because they're connected directly to the drain. With the quarry, they're not connected directly to the drain. And so I have tried to balance the fact that they're not connected directly to the drain to the fact that they are an industrial property. And I've taken a middle ground in the C factor that I've used. And that, I don't know, I could make them an entire industry and a high C factor, but they're not using that part of the drain because they're not directly connected to it. So I've tried to take a middle ground in that they're not zero, even though they only pump into it. And the Drainage Act under pumping for irrigation or pumping into is not particularly clear, except where those pumping rates increase the service level required downstream. And in this case, they're not doing that. In those photos that I showed with the water that's running through the drain, that's when the pump is on. And so it's only a relatively minor base flow that's running within the drain, and they're not using up even the peak capacity that I've allocated within here, as far as I can tell. But if I could figure out a way within the methodology that I have to assign more money as a cost for them, I would have done that.
Very good. Thank you both for a thorough discussion and explanation on all of those questions. I'll go back to council for questions. Councillor Bodner, did you have a follow-up?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Through you to Alana or Paul, I'll start with Alana. So a lot of that explanation sounds reasonable to me that you have come up with. What happens if one of the delegates wants to take it further and challenge on this? What is their opportunity to do that? I know at the Court of Revision it's limited to what we can do. Gross errors or something we picked up on. Can they go a step further? And can you just explain what that would be and how they would do it?
Through you, Deputy Mayor, to Mr. Bodner. Yes, so the residents have 3 points of appeal. Typically, only 2 are used. The first one would be the Court of Revision, which is held by our set council, 3 members. And after that, so many days, they have a process to appeal to the tribunal. So if they're not happy with what the Court of Revision decided, or if there are other area errors that were in the report, then they can have those addressed by the tribunal. The third is the appeal of referee, which I have very limited knowledge of because I haven't been there yet, and I hope never to.
Mr. Marsh, did you have anything to add?
No, I'll just say that the referee is typically involved where there's a legal dispute, where it's not a technical dispute, but it involves more lawyers, and I also hope to never be involved.
Alana? Ms. Vanderveen?
Sorry, through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Bodnar, just to add on to what I was saying, every person within the watershed will be notified of when those meetings will be held, when their deadlines are to get their information into the city clerk, as to if they are going to have an appeal.
Okay, all right. So there is a cost to all of the landowners anytime we delay or if Mr. Marsh was challenged by council to go over this again. And I'm asking this question, would there be a cost to all of the people that have to pay into this drainage system? Additional cost?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Bodnar, yes. Every time that the report is relooked at, there are additional costs. I've asked Mr. Marsh to work for free, but unfortunately he doesn't want to.
You got to be more persuasive, Alana. That's it. I'll wait to hear from other councilors if anybody wants to chime in. Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
You're welcome. Councillor Califf.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, just following what Councillor Bodnar said, Alana, normally tonight, because we're on Zoom and because we're doing everything virtually, normally people would be able to actually be here. Would they be allowed at this point to ask their questions rather than going through it the way we've just been? Would they be allowed to speak tonight to everything we've talked about?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Clay. Yes, they would be able to. Because of COVID, we had asked that they supply or present their concerns to the clerk's department, and those were provided through the delegations.
So I guess I'm looking at it from that point of view, and I'm thinking it almost seems a little unfair that they're not allowed to ask any further questions because there's been a lot of new information given tonight, excellent information, but at the same time, like us, if they have questions, now we're saying, well, they have to appeal it, and which is going to cost them money. And somehow, COVID or no COVID, I'm not sure that seems very fair. Because we don't know what their questions are going to be or what concerns they still have at this point. Does that kind of capture, Councillor Bodnar, what you're heading at too and thinking of when you're saying there's a cost now to go forward? I have a concern about that.
Maybe before you, Councillor Bodnar, Mr. Marsh had his hand up in between your question there, Donna, so I'll go to him and then back to you. Mr. Marsh?
Yeah, I'd just like to speak in support of the councillor's idea there that we would often have an opportunity to engage in a dialogue with the deputations. I'm not sure I would convince everyone that I had done it right the first time, but the dialogue is worth trying to have. And in this meeting format, it hasn't been possible. So I just wanted to say that I would prefer that dialogue as well for whatever that's worth.
Thank you, Mr. Marsh. I guess that's what I'm thinking of. You know, we can all sit here and talk, and I know everybody's at home listening, And it just doesn't seem very fair to me that for them to go forward to ask you any questions, it's now a cost to them. Is there any way, Alana, that we can get around this, or that we can do something different to allow any further questions to come forward? I know we need an answer, and I know we want to move forward, but at the same time, yeah, this format is not good. And I know, you know, you're not going to convince everybody all of the time, but at least if they're allowed to voice their concern and their questions, and they have that opportunity, Mr. Marsh has the opportunity to hear what they're saying and alleviate those concerns, it makes it better all around. You know, to move forward without hearing any kind of further concerns that people have, or questions that may have been raised. I'm just not sure that I'm comfortable with that at this point.
In past reports, sorry, but through you, Deputy Mayor, to the councillor, in the past where there's been a tribunal, and Alana and I have had this experience, we've worked in order to satisfy an appellant's concern through a variety of ways and means. In the case I'm thinking of for a particular drain, we managed to solve 5 people's problems, but not the 6th. And so we still ended up having to go through a formal tribunal hearing. But there are ways to solve problems going through the tribunal process, but it's not particularly flexible in what it does or doesn't allow you to do.
Thank you. Okay.
Anyone else wishes to speak? Back to Councillor Bodner.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I share Councillor Claylout's concerns about this isn't a very good way to really have a back and forth with people. And I don't know the answer. I mean, if we were to refer this back for another look, I don't. Okay, let me ask Mr. Marsh. If we were to refer this back and ask you to take another look at the concerns that have been raised here, do you think your report would come back substantially different than what you have given us tonight?
Mr. Marsh?
Through you, Deputy Mayor, to the councillor, thank you for putting me on the spot. I don't know exactly how to answer that. In part, there's a possibility that if through that dialogue, there's someone that we can reach and have a negotiated process that technically is supported with what I've done and is a better fit. Sure, I'm not going to hang myself on that the report's 100% perfect as presented. Will that cost money to do that? Yes, it will cost money to do that. If we spend that money, could we still end up in the tribunal? Yes, we could spend that money and we could still end up in the tribunal. So in that, I don't know exactly how to answer that, other than to say that if that's council's wish to go forward, I'm here to serve council and the residents to seek a suitable solution.
Sure. So that's some of my work. I think a lot of the answers given tonight to those concerns by the residents seem reasonable, and I just don't want to penalize the whole watershed for a few questions that may or may not be relevant. And I see Mr. Marsh with his hand up, so.
Mr. Marsh, go ahead.
So I'll preface this by saying I'm not a clerk and I don't know how the council rules actually work. But instead of referring it back to me, and maybe Alana, you can tell me if I'm crazy for making this suggestion, but you could potentially table it to the next council meeting in order to receive further deputations. And then it's not referred back to me to do anything with, unless through those deputations at the next meeting, you feel that would be beneficial. And then through that process, all of those people who made deputations tonight can rehash my answers and present their cases anew. And we could go through all this again whenever your next meeting is. I'd be happy to do that. And the cost incurred for doing that is not large. If at the end of that, you want to refer it back to me for revisions with specific instructions on how to make it better, I'm happy to entertain that if that's the outcome. If you want to accept the report at that time, then we've only introduced a delay between one meeting to the next meeting.
Mr. Deputy Mayor, can I continue on that? Okay, so that seems like you ever thought of running for council, Mr. Marsh? With the blessing of the clerk, Deputy Mayor, I think that's a very reasonable approach because it gives the people that did submit questions that opportunity to then say, you know what, that's okay, I'm satisfied with the answer, or yeah, but have you thought of this? And then we have to make a decision. So Mr. Deputy Mayor, can we get the okay from the clerk that that's something that that we can do?
Sure. I didn't, if I can weigh in, I was just wondering if, because of COVID, and the next meeting may not resolve all the problems, I wanted to ask, perhaps Alana, if there was just a pause for a month and the world changed with the COVID rules, and there was that opportunity to reconvene in a way that was pre-COVID to ask those questions. I didn't know if the councillor thought that that might also help. Would there be any cost, and is there any issue, Alana, to pausing the process as opposed to meeting the next meeting?
Chris wants to jump in on that.
Sorry, Mr. Kawamoto wants to jump in on that, if you could. Chris?
Through you, Mr. Chair, maybe I'll refer if the drainage superintendent answers your question, and then I will maybe proceed to ask or clarify my comments.
Thank you. Alana?
Through you, Deputy Mayor. So I think there's a couple of things that can be considered here. One, we can put a pause to ensure that those 5 delegates that have come forward, that their questions have been answered. And then 2, my other concern is, would we be sending another notification to the entirety of the watershed to let them know that this has happened, or this meeting suffice to know that those, I assume that those 5 delegates are watching tonight. Is this enough to be able to suspend this over to the next meeting?
Thank you. I just spoke with the clerk, so we're going to let Chris go first, and then the clerk will deal with all of that, and Councillor Bodner and yourself. Thank you. Chris?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I am looking forward to hear what the clerk says. If the council does move to defer, I would recommend that no new unrelated questions be proposed to Engineer Marsh and the drainage superintendent intervene. Again, the requirements for communication did proceed. There was an opportunity with respect to asking questions. Unfortunately, because of COVID, the process of answering those questions is not ideal, as we've all discussed. However, there may be an opportunity for those questions to be answered and for follow-up questions to those answers to then potentially be forwarded again to Engineer Marsh and to Drainage Superintendent Vanderveen. And I think that is an option for the back and forth of the questions, answers, and clarifications required for a fulsome discussion.
Thank you, Director Kawamoto, and I'll turn to the clerk, Amber.
Good evening. Through the chair, although we can put on hold until we are allowed to have in-person meetings, we are planning for fall in-person meetings, but that is a very moving target, and we are just waiting to see what happens, so I would not hold the date for that. This cannot be pushed to the next meeting. If we allow delegations, I will set up a public meeting that is a standalone meeting, so we can allow as many delegations as needed. Notice will need to be given. So again, this won't happen at the next meeting, but it will happen with ample notice given to the same recipients of the first notice. Generally, delegations are not allowed to come forward with information unless it is new information previous to the last time they delegated. So that is something council may want to consider whether they will allow the same information repeated or only new delegation information. And then I just want to point out that this would be a deferral, so there would be no movement on the staff report, nothing added new. And if you did want any changes to the report, that would just be to refer back to staff to have those changes beforehand.
Thank you. Councillor Bidner, back to you.
Yes, thank you. I'm not for opening this up to everybody. I think everybody's had a shot at it. We had 5 people respond with questions. And I think that the questions have been answered tonight. So those people, if we're willing to give them another shot at saying the answers are good or not good, then, being involved in the drainage issues for a long time, I think Mr. Marsh is right. You're going to be okay with some of them, but not all of them. And this can go on and on and on. And it isn't fair to the other people in the drainage shed that they may have to wait for something that could alleviate some of their problems. Or I think this should move on at a pace that with just this little hiccup that we can address those questions that are just put to us tonight. So I think we should go for the next meeting, and I'm hoping that we don't have to open this up to the whole new delegations or new questions. I think the questions are there. We need to answer those. That's it.
Thank you. Did you, Donna, you had your hand is still up there. Is that just from before? Is there any other questions? Councillor Bodner, did you want to put forward a succinct motion, or do you want me to turn to the clerk to summarize that?
Well, I hope the clerk heard what I said, so if she could put it in something we could use, that would be helpful.
Through the chair, you can simply defer the motion, and I will take into advisement what you said about the delegation process, but I do just want to get clarification. So you are asking that the engineer and staff work with the delegations that have come forward already, and if they aren't satisfied, give them another chance to do a verbal delegation if possible. Is that correct? Or is it just written going forward?
Councillor Butter?
Well, I just want them to have a comeback to the answers that Alana and Paul gave tonight, and then, I think then council has to make a decision whether we're going to go on with it, because, I thought those answers were pretty fair, and I'm not an expert in any of this, but the experts are here in the room. So, I'd just like to have them respond to the answers, and then at the next meeting, we make a decision on on going forward with this.
If I could, Councilor Bowden, then where you see, I think the clerk's question was verbally or written?
So verbally, that would actually have to be a separate meeting, or would it be part of our council meeting?
Madam Clerk?
I could accommodate 1 to 2 people if needed and it was well planned out, but that means you would not allow any new delegations and it might create a 2-tier system. The preference would be that staff and the engineer work with the delegations going forward, and then they submit further written delegations at the next meeting.
Good. That sounds good to me.
Very good. So if that motion is on the floor, Madam Clerk, will I still be able to get the Court of Revision appointed, or should we wait till the next meeting? Next week? Next meeting? Very good. So is there any clarity needed on the motion by anyone? Seeing none. Moved by Councillor Bodnar, seconded by, could I get a seconder? Councillor Bagu. All in favor of the motion? Carried. Thank you. Okay, we will now move on to, thank you, Mr. Marsh, thank you, Elena. We will now proceed with item 7.2, Planning and Development Department Report number 2021-210, subject clerk's planning and building update. Director, if you want to speak to that, because I know you have more than just the clerk's duties. Please proceed.
Good evening. As Acting Director of Planning and Development and the City Clerk, I will be providing an update tonight on planning, building, and the Clerk's Department. And also as the CEMC, I will be including an update on emergency management. The divisions I will be speaking about tonight are the glue of the organization. We keep everything running. We ensure compliance. We ensure safety. We're the group that if things are running smoothly, you don't hear from us day to day. Because issuing building permits and marriage licenses, while very important, don't make it to the paper. When thinking about the previous year, though, COVID is always the forefront of my mind. And so I want to take a minute and acknowledge that staff were not set up to work remotely and provide services electronically in March 2020. The shift to work from home has been a challenge. Working from home and providing electronic services can be an amazing and it can be an efficient service, but not being prepared to work from home, not being allowed to come into the office, not being set up with processes to provide electronic services, and juggling everything personal that was happening during the pandemic was a lot to take on, and I am so very proud of how city staff pivoted when called upon. Tonight I'm not going to focus on the last year, other than during the emergency management update, and I'm not going to talk about our day-to-day activities like building permits, zoning bylaw changes, freedom of information requests, burial permits, and lottery licensing. I'm going to talk about our goals for the upcoming year, which are those extra projects above and beyond the day-to-day activities. Next slide, please. Emergency management in Port Colborne does not have a dedicated staff person. It is run by several staff as a project done at the side of our desks. We prepare for emergencies. We attend training programs to understand how best to address an emergency. We keep an updated HIRA, which is a document outlining hazards and risks throughout the organization and allows us to plan for them. We report to the province to ensure compliance, and we run training exercises. Yes, similar to the picture you see from the Parks and Rec episode, we set up a room called the EOC, we wear vests, and we all have binders. In October 2019, we had the windstorm. We had staff all over the city for 12 hours dealing with the emergency, and then up to 48 hours afterwards cleaning up. The day after the storm, the emergency continued though. We had long-term hydro outages to address and insurance claims with the province to process. And finally, there was the usual paperwork. That incident was an excellent example of how emergency management works in Port Colborne. When called upon, city staff drop everything and pivot to address the emergency. As with most emergencies, in that incident, staff were able to get back to their normal workload within 2 weeks. So my role is the CEMC. That stands for Community Emergency Management Coordinator. Fire Chief Scott Lawson is the alternate CEMC, and we have worked as a team during this pandemic. If I had to explain the CEMC, I would say it's the City Clerk of Emergency Management. We make the city, make sure the city is prepared, that everything runs smoothly, and then we complete the paperwork afterwards. Next, there is the Emergency Control Group, which operates in the Emergency Operations Center, or the EOC. The way this works is that there may be an emergency, such as a large fire. The fire chief might be out on site. The communications advisor might attend, as well as the mayor. But there will be a second location called the EOC, where staff are addressing the emergency by evaluating what supplies are needed and planning for the future. Considerations in the EOC might include evacuation, drinking water, food and shelter for the first responders, and of course, communicating this all out to the public. In a regular year, emergency management most likely wouldn't have been included in any of these updates you're seeing. It is a routine task where preparing is most of the job. As you know, though, 2020 proved very different. In February of 2020, I began to get invited to provincial updates from the PIOG, which is the provincial EOC, which at that point had been activated. In March, I called the province and reported that we had activated our EOC as well. Our EOC was very different than we had trained for, though. There was no emergency site, no fire, no windstorm. We partially activated our EOC. We called in the necessary staff, and the marathon of meetings began. As recommended by the province, we began to plan for up to 2/3 of our employees to be sick or quarantining. We planned for long-term lockdowns with no funding coming into the city. We discussed what functions of our organization were actually essential when faced with large staff shortages. We discussed with other municipalities about how and if we could lean on each other if needed, knowing that this was a unique situation as we were all in the same emergency. We discussed PPE. We knew fire and possibly water workers needed the PPE the most, but we also knew that as an organization that the paramedics might need our supply. Once the initial 2 months of complete uncertainty passed, we continued to plan and adapt to the changes. We have seen bubbles, phases, colors and steps, lockdowns, and reopenings. In the last year, the most important thing I have learned is to plan and then prepare to pivot. I call it the plan, pivot, repeat method, and I'm beginning to get pretty used to it. Currently, 68% of adults in Ontario are fully vaccinated, which is excellent, but we are not done with this pandemic yet. We are currently watching numbers and preparing for a fourth wave of some sort. We are also working on recovery, though. This is very important for recovery for staff as well as the community, and we are looking at when and how to open the different types of services that we provide. We understand that we may need to mitigate this for years to come and are thinking beyond recovery to what a new normal might look like. Now I'll move on to legislative services. In the past year, Council has seen us implement new agenda management software. This has included a new look and feel to the agendas. It is more accessible to the public and has created efficiencies in the report writing process for staff. We also have moved to virtual meetings due to the pandemic. While there are definitely some benefits to virtual meetings, I can safely say that staff, council, and the public all want to be back in the council chambers, and we can't wait to deliver. We estimate that in addition to increased charges, each virtual meeting adds about 10 hours of staff time. The deputy clerk and I make a lot of jokes about moving to the IT department, but it is just one of the examples of staff having to change what we do and how we work during this time. Currently, we are planning for in-person meetings in the fall. We have not seen success with meetings where half of council are in the chambers and half are at home, but we hope to have all of council and the public back soon. We will plan for the fall, but this will be a moving target as everything has been during the pandemic. Due to the added cost and time of the virtual meetings, we will not be offering this as an option moving forward without council direction, as it is a significant shift in staff resources. In the next year, you will see a number of items from us. We will continue to build out eScribe. You will see a conflict of interest registry, closed meeting agendas in the program, and expansion to other committees. I intended to update the procedural bylaw at the same time as the eScribe implementation, but wasn't able to complete this goal during the pandemic. It is still in my mind though, and to be honest, something I really enjoy working on, so hopefully you will see it soon. During the pandemic, the licensing clerk has been working hard on a review of our business licensing process and fees. This is a bylaw that is very old and unique to each municipality, so not easy to just steal it from our neighbors. This will be coming to council in the fall, and you shouldn't expect to see many changes. What you will see going forward is, in licensing, is a complete understanding of why we are licensing each business. There will be clear rules, fees that reflect the costs, and afterwards, updated documents such as applications, tip sheets, and inspection reports, which will be created to improve the customer experience and create staff efficiencies. I also hope to complete a delegated authority bylaw. This is a bylaw that sets out every place where council delegates decision-making authority to staff. I believe that currently delegated authority is spread out throughout many bylaws and is often confusing, and DA does not exist on many items, and because of that, council sees many unnecessary reports. The DA process will help speed up services from staff, and because of this, I have received many asks by staff for this. 2022. The election. I don't think I need to say very much more than that. As every councillor went through the process, you all know that this department lives and breathes the election in 2022. I also want to address a fewer long-term items that may not happen before we go into election mode, but I wanted to let you know that they are our priorities post-election. The council composition review wasn't completed due to the pandemic. I will be bringing a report forward in the fall that will look at this and suggest a consultant be hired immediately following the election to begin a professional review. I will be asking for approval and funding for this in the 2022 budget, so this can begin directly following the election. The largest project I want to complete is records retention. This project includes an updated records retention bylaw, training for all staff, and the implementation of electronic records management software. This will be one of those projects, like customer service, where it will be very consuming for each department, but has great benefits, including creating efficiencies for staff and open data for the public. Also on my list is updating the Freedom of Information process from the staff perspective. FOIs can be scary, and we want to work with staff so they know when and how to release information through a routine disclosure. This would create a simple process for small Freedom of Information requests. And lastly, we would like to overhaul the citizen committee process. This would include an updated application process, terms of references, procedural training, and possibly even staff help from our department. I'm going to turn to the building division now. They have had some turnover lately, but we hope to hire a building clerk this week, and we will be back up to full complement again soon. While you all know Alex, you may not have met John yet. He is our new chief building official, and he is the center of the picture. Also in the picture is Tony, who stepped in as a CBO for a number of months and is now assisting with building inspections and plans review. The building division has one goal. They want to revamp the permit process and prepare for a more efficient spring 2022. They will be working this fall on implementing new software, which will allow them to improve the application process, better interact with other departments and stakeholders, and even speed up the inspection process by allowing staff to complete reports in the field. The division is going to review many of their processes and applications. They want to be able to better serve the average citizen, the one that just needs a small permit and maybe has never done something like this before. Lastly, the building division needs to conduct a full review of their fees. A request will be coming forward in the next 2 months asking for funding to begin this process. The building department should be self-sufficient. This means that development pays for development. A resident does not pay to help build their neighbor's house. Our fees need to be evaluated and, yes, raised to meet this threshold. This will not price us out of the market for development, though. This will make sure that we can provide the services needed during the process, such as a quick turnaround on building permits and timely inspection scheduling. Next is the planning division. In the picture, you will know David and Chris, but also included is Ella, our summer student, and Rick Brady, who has stepped in to assist for a bit. The planning staff has been working hard, and there was a number of items that you will see from them in the next year. Chris will be working on a review of the Committee of Adjustment. This review will include evaluating the processes, procedures, and moving to the eScribe platform. One of the many items Ella, our summer student, has been working on is our heritage property review. The goal of this project is to narrow down our list of properties on the Heritage Registry and identify those that need further investigation in the future. We currently have a consultant reviewing our policies on cannabis. Council will see a report by the end of the year with recommendations on best practices surrounding cannabis, including what we can and cannot do as a municipality. Staff will be working to update our parkland dedication bylaw, and also the affordable housing policy is currently on hold, but is still on the list and has not been forgotten about. If approved by Council, the fees for the planning department will also be evaluated through the same process as the building fees. In addition to the general fees, development charges also need to be addressed. The city is planning for growth. For that to occur, the resources need to be in place and we need to be prepared. I don't believe that the taxpayers should hold the burden for this development. In 2022 budget, you will see a request for a complete development charges review to be conducted before it is actually legislatively required. Our development charges currently reflect lower than expected growth and are phased in over a number of years. This process for updated development charges will begin at the end of 2022. Staff will use any increase in fees to make sure that we are prepared for development in the city. On the second floor, we want to be welcoming to development, but we also want to be accessible for those with small projects. You all know how much I preach customer service, both internal and external. The second floor is made up of some pretty amazing people, and we're going to work to make sure that the public can access us easily in order to accomplish their goals. And thank you for your time, and we can't wait to see you again soon in person.
Thank you very much, Acting Director. I should have said after before Amber spoke that report was moved by Councillor Bagu and seconded by Councillor Clayliff. Any questions to the presentation or to Acting Director Point? Council? None? Amber, I'd just like to say you have pivoted a lot into this new position. I think I think I can speak for council and the mayor. You've handled it wonderfully, and you've got a pretty aggressive agenda ahead. And if it results in the kind of improvements that made in the first session of your appointment and in customer service, then we'll be well served. So, job well done. Thank you.
Thank you.
I beg your pardon. Thank you. Yes. All in favor to receive the report? Opposed? Carried unanimously. Thank you. We will now proceed with item 7.4. Community Safety and Enforcement Department Report 2021-201, subject consolidation of emergency services dispatch, presented by Scott Lawson, moved by Councillor Wells, seconded by Councillor Bagu. Councillor Wells?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Just trying to find something here for a minute. I'm sorry. This switch, I'm all in favor of it, and I know that it has to be done within a fairly expedient time frame. I was just wondering if, through you to Chief Lawson, can we move there to the digital format now, Or do we have to stay on the analog until 2022?
Chief Lawson?
Through you, Deputy Mayor, to Council. I believe we could do it at any time. It's actually, quite frankly, my concern is who our dispatching service is going to be coming from. But yes, I'm going to say we can switch at any time.
Councillor Wells?
And would that cause any problems or complications with who we would select as a dispatcher?
Through the Deputy Mayor to Council. No, I don't believe it would cause any issues, but I think there could be some cost implications. Right now, there's 3 different scenarios that are being tossed around, and one of them, which I mean, I believe that we'd all be in favor of, is a region owned and operated, which they'd actually be putting up the majority of the cost for that infrastructure, our radios, our base stations, and all that. So right at this moment in time, I think it's best for us to wait till Q4, the region to do their financial analysis and come back with their game plan. And from that point, I think we can make an educated guess of what we should do and what direction we should go.
Councillor Wells?
Thank you. No questions.
Thank you. Any other councillors? Questions to Councillor Danch?
Yeah, thanks for that. And I just want to echo what Harry's saying. Like Scott, this is a no-brainer, right? Like we have to move forward here. I mean, that's plain and simple, right? I mean, we've got the repeater in town on top of the hospital, or the mill, whichever it was there. I mean, we have to move forward with this. That's all there is to it, right?
I totally agree. I believe that we have to go digital. I think the big question for us is who's going to be doing the dispatching. So while I think there's time, we just have to investigate our options, and I believe that's what the report speaks to. I'm glad to hear that it sounds like everybody's in favor of going digital. It's just a matter of time that we have to. It's our dispatching services. And I think for us to jump the gun and go digital tomorrow, while that takes a little bit more time, for us to make that decision to jump whatever the region might be offering the municipality as some cost savings, I think we just have to be patient right now.
Yeah, and that's positive for sure. And I mean, like I said, I think everybody wants to echo the same idea. But yeah, let's move forward and keep our community safe, right?
Definitely.
Thank you. Any other questions for Scott? There being none, the motion has been duly moved and seconded. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Now we'll proceed with item 7.6, Chief Administrative Officer Report number 2021-194, subject parquet at H.H. Noel Lakeview Park, concept plans. Mr. Long will be presenting that. It's moved by Councillor Kalalev, seconded by Councillor Bagu. Go right to questions. Councillor Kalalev?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Long. Gary, I like the conceptual plans and everything. I know you were talking about number 2. My only concern is I think there's a very minimal number of tables in that. Is there the ability to add more picnic tables than that to that particular plan?
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, to the councillor. Yes, these are just concept plans. So sort of by definition, they're really just for discussion purposes. So there is an opportunity for council and staff to modify these, to add and subtract. And if that's a preference of this council, then we can certainly take that under advisement and certainly incorporate more tables into the final plan.
I guess I'm just looking at the fact I know people are so happy to get out. I think you'll fill those tables pretty darn quick. And we'll probably need a few more. Anyway, yeah, and I like the idea of the new pad for it. I know it doesn't seem like it's a lot of extra money, but I think that we probably could use that new pad. And then that'll also lead or give us the ability to add to that as well and make it a nicer, more inviting spot. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions of Mr. Long? Mr. Long, I just had a couple here. One was, I like option 2 as well. I don't know if it's been thought about as far as, it doesn't state in the report, how many food trucks, I beg your pardon, councillors, I didn't see your hands up earlier. If you could speak to the layout in terms of, will it have preparations for multiple food trucks? And secondly, we're all dealing with storms, and we saw what happened through that area a couple years ago. Will all these pedestals and outlets for wastewater, et cetera, be constructed to assume that one of those storms will come up again through the pond and get through there? And so I'm wondering if that will be imported. And although it's not in your report, I had the opportunity to, with my grandson, use the washrooms over there, and that is, I think, still undersuited, but I guess it's not in a parquet report, so I'll leave that for budget and another time. But I'm wondering if you could address flooding and preparation for other food trucks.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I appreciate those questions. So in terms of the number of food trucks, I think as council and the community know, currently there are 2 food truck vendors there, and I think they're having quite a successful summer, which is great.
Yep.
But looking ahead to 2022 and beyond, it is our plan to have up to 3 food trucks at that location. I know there is council direction to have a variety of food trucks there rather than having, say, stationary or permanent food trucks there for the duration of the summer. There might be an arrangement whereby we would have 1 food truck there for the whole summer, and then others would maybe rotate every couple of weeks. The details of that have not been finalized yet, but certainly staff are very mindful of the discussion that council's had and the preference that council has to have a variety of different food offerings at that location. But I can confirm that we are looking to have at least 3 food trucks at that location. I think the Deputy Mayor raises some very good points, some very valid points that we will need to take very seriously when it comes to the setup and construction of the parquet, just given some of the issues he's raised around stormwater management and so on. So we'll definitely take that into consideration and into account as we piece this together.
Thank you very much. Apologies, Councillor Bagu and Wells. Councillor Bagu.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Mr. Long, I actually went down there a couple times over the last 4 days. I talked to the vendors, I talked to the users. Actually, I was surprised. Most of the users weren't even from Colborne, which was actually really nice to see. I do have a big concern regarding our so-called shed. We should be calling it a bunker. Actually, it's got to be totally waterproof and everything else. We just have problems there. And I'm glad to see Mason's working with the vendors there and blocking off the access to the propane electrical plugs, because kids are always running around in there. And I'm sure you're going to incorporate some sort of fencing around our bunker, I guess you call it. The one great thing people said, they liked the cement bases for the Adirondack chairs behind the part of the parquet. They said it kept them nice and clean and stuff, and they're definitely going to come back. The other issue was I know it's still in the planning stages, but the umbrellas. The umbrellas there exist there. The strong winds, some of them seem to relocate vertically, and so we just got to make sure our umbrellas are going to be industrial and bolted down or whatever it is. And the the biggest point over there, people told me they want shade. Because of the heat and summer sun, shade is probably one of the most important things that they like over there, where they can relax in the shade and have their meal or ice cream and that. One thing I like to see, probably further the planning, is a painted crosswalk across the street to the actual playground. Right now, it's all in the open. Parents and kids and grandparents are crossing wherever. But we have some sort of painted crosswalk coming from the park or the washrooms or whatever. I think it would help the pedestrians and the vehicles. Even this summer, it might be nice to see that. Have our city guys go out there and do some sort of crosswalk or a sign, caution pedestrians crossing, because there are a lot of people that cross that little road. And my last point is, it's going to come up later on, not today, but I have somewhat of a problem spending $16,800 on the custom asphalt paint for over there. What I would like to see, this suggestion is, we got all kinds of groups at Park Colborne, the art club, we got school kids, and it's a great way for our citizens to participate, as the mayor calls it. And we could get some environmental friendly paint. Once a year, we get a group to go out there, do their thing, and it's their thing, and it's something they'll be proud about. They'll bring people down and say, one year, get a grade 6 class or something, have a contest. Your class wins, you come down, you paint your design, rather than the asphalt paint, the custom stuff that's like almost $17,000. I'm sure we can get sponsors from different paint companies and that, and different people. Actually, I try to call one, but he's on vacation. So just to keep that in mind, Mr. Long, I do appreciate it. I do like option 2. I think it's great, as long as we make it safe for our residents and, of course, the kids. I'm all for it, 100%. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Long. Do you have any comments?
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, the city project team really appreciates having the councillors' comments and input. It's very, very helpful. And we also agree that the cost estimates that have been provided for each of the concept plans need to be revisited. We do believe that there are some opportunities there for some cost savings. So rest assured, we will not take all of that at face value. I think there's an opportunity for us to do a bit better on some of the pricing. And as the councillor has outlined, there's some low cost options as well as some other options that we can look at a reduced cost. So really appreciate everybody's comments tonight and appreciate having the support. Thank you. Councillor Wells.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you to Mr. Long. Was this part of the 21 budget? Was this a separate entity? Because I don't remember this being a separate item in the 2021 budget. So was this actually a separate item in the 2021 budget?
Mr. Long?
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I may have to refer to my colleague, Mr. Bowles, who has appeared suddenly online here. So I'll defer to him. Thank you.
Mr. Bowles?
Through the Deputy Mayor to Council, this project wasn't budgeted. This project was actually started by a number of individuals. I think back, conceptually discussed back in 2019, going into 2020. It didn't come through in the budget documents. It may have come through as a note in another report to Council, but it wasn't included in the 2021 capital budget.
Thank you. Councillor Wells?
Thank you for that answer. I didn't see you there, Brian, so that's why I went to Gary. Gary, with regards to the concepts on this, in the report and that, I didn't see any tie-in to the waterfront center. Is there any consideration of how this will fit in as a link between the park and that the waterfront center?
Mr. Long?
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, to the councillor, he raises an excellent point. The welcoming center, the new multi-purpose welcoming center that staff has discussed with council just in the last couple of weeks is obviously sort of a new idea, although certainly the redevelopment of that site is something that's been in the works for a few months. So I think the councillor makes a good point that whatever we do at the H.H. Knoll Parkette should support, should complement, should tie into what we are contemplating for the area that will become the new multi-purpose center and area for welcoming the cruise ship passengers. I know the site, sort of the initial site plans and renderings that we've prepared for that site for the cruise ship area and welcoming center does provide linkages and connections and pathways to the downtown core, as well as pathways and connections to H.H. Knoll Park. So again, I think the welcoming center is a new idea, but it's one that has council support and staff support. We have submitted an application to the federal government. So I think it's timely for the H.H. Knoll Parkette to align with the goals and objectives that we have for the welcoming center.
Thank you, Mr. Long. Councillor Wells?
Thank you for that response. The other, I'd like to say that I like all the options are there, but one of the features I don't like are the jail bars. I think it to be, and it may limit us. I really prefer option 4 myself with the planter boxes that could be removed in the off seasons when nobody's going to be there. That would open up the area, or they could be moved around to expand the area somewhat and make it more versatile. But that again, that's just a personal comment on that sense. The only other aspect on this, Gary, is in your report you make a comment that in regards to the no need for public engagement on it. I would tend to think that we do need public engagement, as Mark had referred to as having groups come down there and being involved with putting on a different painting scheme on the pavements and that. I think the public engagement on this is necessary for them to get an ownership for it. So if the more they're involved with it, the more it becomes theirs. So I think we have to make the opportunities there for the public to be engaged on this. Okay, and that's it for me.
Thank you, Mr. Long. Can you, Councilor Rose? Thank you, Mr. Long. Can you comment to that? Is there time to do that? In working with Mr. Bowles, might it be a dollar envelope, but have the engagement? Is there time to do that?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I appreciate Councillor Wells' comments. If there is direction from council to conduct public engagement, staff can certainly proceed with that. I think we'd like to get that direction tonight, and then we can proceed accordingly. I think one of the things that we could do is we could put out a couple of the options to the community for input and include an online survey asking the community to review the concept plans, provide some comments, as well as any other ideas, suggestions they have for the parkette location. We've received a lot of great ideas and comments this evening, and I know that our community would also rise to the occasion and provide some very thoughtful comments as well. So if there is council direction for this evening, I think we'd like to proceed right away and to get the concept plans out for community review. And as I said, we could include an online survey fairly quickly, and then because I think as the report indicates, we'd like to make a decision on the concept plan that we're going with, make any revisions to that, and then get it into the market for a tender so that we can have this designed and constructed and open for some time next spring.
Thank you. Councillor Wells, did you want to make an amendment to that effect, and we could vote on it separately and then the report?
Sure. Yes. Just bear with me here. Let me just look at what the motion is. I believe the motion was to
proceed.
Yeah, to proceed. The inclusion of public engagement as seen available by staff.
Great. Madam Clerk, is that sufficient?
So I just want to clarify that you are approving option 2 tonight and seeking public engagement, but it won't come back to council. Is that correct?
Councillor Wells, did you want it to come back?
Yes, I would like it to come back, and I'm not sure whether if council is so desirous of option 2 without the public engagement, then there is no need for public engagement. Then just proceed with that. I think the option should be left open and come back to council after public engagement.
Through you to Madam Clerk. So does that change the entire report, or can it still be option 2 with engagement? I think Councillor Wells would prefer the former, to have the whole thing revisited in a public engagement process.
I would ask Gary Long to clarify timelines and if this is acceptable. But I think my recommendation, based on the intent of the councillor, is to refer this back to staff to gain public engagement process and then bring this back to council after.
Mr. Long, do you want to speak first, and then I'll go to Councillor Wells on his desire to adopt the clerk's thoughts. Mr. Long.
Yes, thank you, Deputy Mayor. Thank you, Madam Clerk. I think we could, pending council direction tonight, I think we could move very quickly public engagement plan and be in a position to report back to council at the first or second meeting in September. I don't think that would really hold us up that much.
Mr. Wells, did you want to then bring forward the motion, or would you like the clerk to read back her thoughts? Save you the trouble of working that through.
If the clerk could read it back, her thoughts, I would prefer not to have to refer it, but I would like to hear the clerk's remarks.
Sorry if there's any confusion through the chair. I thought the intent was that you did want to reflect on the selection after public engagement, and if that is the case, then the recommendation should be to refer to staff to engage in or look into a public engagement process, and then come back to council after that.
Councillor Wells?
In that, then I will refer it back to, I would ask that it be referred back to staff to include a component of engagement, and then report back to council with the results of the engagement.
So, Madam Clerk, does that need a seconder, or there's no debate on that?
The seconder and no debate.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Bagu. Councillor, thank you. All in favor of the referral? Raise your hands. That is carried. Thank you, Council. Thank you, Mr. Long. Now proceed with item 7.7, Corporate Services Department Report 2021-209, subject 2021 beach operations update from Mr. Bowles, moved by Councillor Bodnar, seconded by Councillor Wells. Questions to the report? Councillor Bodnar?
Thank you, through you, Deputy Mayor, to, I guess, Brian. So we get the nuts and bolts of this as people coming and going. I was kind of looking for an overall view of how things are going on the ground there. I appreciate all the, the numbers, but comments on how things are progressing, how the public's behaving, how staff are finding things. Just a little look-see at how things are progressing at both beaches.
Mr. Bowles?
Through our Deputy Mayor to Council, I appreciate that, and I guess perhaps add a little more color on Centennial Cedar Bay. Staff have reported, and everything's a case-by-case scenario, but this year compared to last year, we'd say that things have been pretty successful, and we knock on wood. We actually have a couple written responses and emails and that came back to staff that the community is pretty happy with the way that things are turning out at the beach this year so far. We definitely haven't had some of the overcrowding that we've had in previous years. Nickel Beach, the same kind of model, except I think there is at times, specifically on weekends, a desire from the general public outside of Port Colborne to get onto our beaches. People are very excited to come to Port Colborne and utilize the beaches. And as this report outlines, we haven't yet recommended opening past our recommended 150 spots for the people from outside of Port Colborne. The model there really is, as we look at the different variants that exist today and communications about a potential additional wave, we just don't think it's prudent right now to open that up. I think our biggest issue is, as we have opened up to the 150, we did note that our bathroom facilities weren't quite enough, so we did add capacity there. And I can identify to council that coming into the 2022 budget, there is going to be a number of projects for the beach that will be brought forward for council to consider at Nickel Beach, moving forward to improve the washroom capabilities at the beach, as well as some of the other facilities for individuals that may need attention while at the beach. So that is something to look forward to in the September time period when we bring out the 2022 capital budget. All in all, though, if council has any comments on the beaches, I've appreciated the comments that we've received today, and we've tried to action those. But generally, our commentary and the feedback we've received from residents has been quite positive with the changes that have been made and approved by council this year.
Thank you, Mr. Bowles. Councillor Bodnar? Anything else?
No, that's fine. That's what I wanted to hear. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Wells.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Through you to Director Bowles. It's good to see the numbers. I like it, and I think it's very useful for us to, we see 53% of the people visiting the beaches are from outside of the Niagara area, which is, and we're not really even promoting it. So if we were to promote the beach and establish the beach so that we can promote it, I think it would be a great benefit for the city going forward. And these numbers are what will allow us to support that and put together some very good and accurate planning for the upcoming years. So again, I like the numbers. I also do like the colorful comments as Ron was looking for, but I do think these numbers are very beneficial for us in planning and going forward, and there was something that was missing in the past. So thank you for that, Brian.
Thank you. Any other councillors with questions? Seeing none, you've seen the recommendation to receive. All in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Bowles. Okay, moving on to this evening. It's the end of the reports. Motions. There are no motions this evening. Item number 17, notice of motions. Are there any notices of motions this evening? Councillor Bagu, is that your hand up?
I do have my hand up. I don't have a notice of motion, Mr. Deputy Mayor, but I want to apologize for going in and out of camera. My next door neighbor's hot water tank just blew up, so I must be the only one with a big vacuum cleaner. So I do apologize, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
No, that's great. Thank you for your assistance. I'm sure he's well pleased. Next is minutes of boards, commissions, and committees. There are no minutes of boards, commissions, and committees this evening. I'll now move to bylaws. Madam Clerk, are there any bylaws this evening?
Yes, there are a number of bylaws this evening, and I've received a question regarding bylaws 19.5 to 19.15. These are housekeeping bylaws as a result of the approval to begin using the AMPS process. The bylaw amendments move the enforcement from the Provincial Offences Act, which is the POA, to the Administrative Monetary Penalty Systems, which is AMPS. This takes it from a court-based system to an administrative fee system. The bylaws themselves will be enforced the same way as they were under the past system, and the right to appeal a ticket are still in place, but held within the municipality rather than the courthouse. And with that, I'll just note that bylaws 19.1 and 19.3 were pulled this evening, so you will be approving the rest of the bylaws.
Thank you. Are there any questions for those bylaws? Councillor Kalila.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Through you to Amber, I just wanted to say thank you for that. I just wanted to ask you for my question was just to have clarification, because I know when people see bylaws and that we're changing them, I already had questions about, what was changing, what was happening, and you're trying to explain to them the new system. So I just wanted people to understand that we were going from the POA system to this new one, and that some of the bylaw fees might be increasing. I said I wasn't sure how that would all work out, but many of the bylaws would be reviewed, and some of them probably would be changing in the future. But this was more an administrative change, and I've got that right, as to how the process around the bylaws happening is what's going on right now, right?
Through the chair, that is correct. These amendments just clarify that we will be using the fees bylaw going forward.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions? Not. I'll call the vote on the bylaws. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. Now moving on to confidential items. There are no confidential items this evening. Procedural motions and information items. There are no procedural motions or information items this evening. Thank you for watching tonight's council meeting. Next council meeting will be held on August 9th. This meeting is now adjourned. Thank you, council.
Hey, Mark.